Joining me now are three of the best political analysts in the country, all CNN contributors. Republican strategist Ed Rollins. Ed was also former White House political director under Ronald Reagan. New York Daily News columnist Errol Louis. Errol is also the host of the morning show on WWRL in New York. And Democratic strategist Hank Sheinkopf. Also, happy birthday to Hank. It is his birthday today. Well, let's get started. We're going to jump right on in here. The New York Times is reporting that President Bush is responsible for the current housing crisis. The White House today responding. We've got a full screen here. We want to share with you what Dana Perino had to say, saying, quote, "The Times reporting in the story amounted to finding selected quotes to support a story the reporters fully intended to write from the onset while disregarding anything that didn't fit into their point of view." Who's right here? Hank, we'll get started with you. Is the Times right in its assessment and reporting? I mean, President Bush was pushing this idea of ownership society. What are your thoughts?
Look, when you are the President of the United States and something fails, you take responsibility for it. It is not that this was just a single failure. This was a gross financial failure, a failure to regulate financial institutions, and capitalism run wild that resulted in a disaster that we're going to be paying for a long time. And real people are going to get hurt by.
And, you know, in this case, what the White House is saying is, look, you can't lay the blame entirely on us, that there were financial conditions that essentially they started out with a very noble and lofty goal, as did the Clinton administration. They wanted people to own their homes, and that they're not to blame entirely for this mess that we're in right now.
There's always a period of correction, and I think I say this as a Republican, and I think the New York Times laid out a very interesting piece and may have overstated, but I think equally as important, the Bush White House is overly sensitive in getting blamed for anything, and they're going to get blamed for a lot. They might as well get used to it, because when they leave town, it's going to be a 10-year thing. The reality is they got to correct. When you're running the government and things aren't going well, whatever your noble intention may be, you correct it. You should have corrected a war, which corrected another surge. You basically should have corrected the financial thing. This was predicted. John Snow, when he was the Treasury Secretary, raised very serious issues, had negotiated with the House. The House and Senate were controlled by Republicans up till 2 years ago. So it was really on our watch. So it's very difficult for us to say, well, Barney Frank did it or Chris Dodd did it, when we've really controlled most of the agenda for the last 8 years.
Errol?
Yeah, the problem, my only quibble with the New York Times piece was that it didn't go back far enough. This problem has been brewing for 10 years. The Consumer Federation of America, AARP, a number of consumer rights groups have been talking about this for literally a decade. For them to sort of pick up the last 2 or 3 years, well, who's most to blame in the last 2 or 3 years, it's not all that important. I think the one central point that they made, which I don't think the Bush administration can really dispute, is that there are a number of senior Bush administration officials who said that they pulled away a lot of the regulation that might have caught this, might have stopped this. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court to fight for the right to take away regulatory power from the states. I mean, they were sued by all 50 attorneys general, Republicans, independents, Democrats. They all said that we've got to keep an eye on these subprime lenders. The Bush administration very explicitly wanted to open the door and let them do whatever they wanted to. And so they have a measure of blame that they cannot avoid.
That's what I said in the beginning. Again, you know, the Times, could we say the Times overstating the argument? Maybe. But did the Bush administration do all that it could have done to protect consumers, essentially, and others from rapacious financial institutions? And the answer is no. Different issue.
You know, Vice President Cheney, he is out. He's doing the talk. He's doing the circuit right now, talking to different media outlets. He's essentially saying, look, our administration will be vindicated. I mean, that history down the road, we'll look back and say, you know, they weren't to blame for everything. And it's not just that, but Vice President Dick Cheney is also taking a look at Joe Biden. And he's essentially saying, well, take a look at his role, that there's going to be a different kind of a role versus the role that Cheney had. We've got some sound for you. We want to listen to what Vice President Cheney had to say.
If he wants to diminish the office of vice president, that's obviously his call. I think that President-elect Obama will decide what he wants in a vice president. And apparently, from the way they're talking about it, he does not expect him to have as consequential a role as I've had during my time.
Okay, we don't know what history is going to say, but there is this whole debate on what should be the proper role for the vice president. Errol? Well,
there's a constitutional question that they were also fighting about. I mean, one really overlooked thing was that the Bush-Cheney administration really had a certain contempt for Congress. I mean, the thing that strikes me about vice presidential power with this administration was Vice President Cheney driving to Congress, where they had an office waiting for him, where he could basically run the Republican conference in Congress, which you know, I think led to the mistakes that left them in the minority in 2006. I mean, you know, if Biden wants to follow that path, he's welcome to. But I think this administration has a very different sense of restraint. They're not going to look to dominate everything in foreign policy and in Congress and everywhere that they look. They're not going to try and expand powers. I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and what is the role?
There's a long history between Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld, who were the chiefs of staff for Richard Nixon. And at a time that Nixon was weakened by Watergate, the Congress pulled back a lot of the powers that had been taken over in the first term by Nixon, powers that obviously were abused. So all during their period in Congress, when Cheney was a leader in Congress and what have you, he got very indignant about Democrats taking powers that he thought away from the presidency. Bush, for some reason, agreed with them, gave them back the powers. Powers are very clear. We're a three-headed monster. We have a Supreme Court that is not as active on a daily basis as the Congress, but there's no place in the Constitution that says the vice president has unique powers. He basically presides over the Senate, and he steps in when the president is not able to do the functions of the job. It's not some enormous job that became, and he was the most powerful vice president in history. And the combination of he and Rumsfeld and their partnership were basically what guided the war, guided the economic policy, guided the energy policy. I would hope that the next vice president doesn't have those powers.
Well, Vice President-elect Joe Biden is going to be on Larry King Live a little later, but we have some sound of what he said, of what Biden essentially says his role should be.
My role as vice president is unlike some of the others. I've asked for no specific portfolio, that is, I take care of the environment or one particular area, and that I be essentially his counselor in chief. And thus far, as the administration has begun to unroll, we're rolling out our cabinet and the rest. That's the role I've played. I hope that's the role I'll play for the next 4 years.
Well, Hank, we do know there is a very specific role, that he is supposed to be this middle-class czar. Will this work? Is this a good fit for Joe Biden?
Middle-class czar, good fit for him. He typifies the kind of voters that, frankly, Barack Obama will need to hold on to get reelected and to keep the Congress going in the direction it should. But going back to Dick Cheney, improper delegation of authority to a vice president by the president, no question about it, and one that we're going to pay a price for a long time.
Okay, we'll have more on the Biden versus Cheney in just a bit. I'm back now with Ed Rollins, Errol Louis, and Hank Sheinkopf. Well, there are new numbers out, a new CNN opinion research poll out today that compares the opinion of Cheney compared to other vice presidents. I mean, it's just not looking good. 23% rated Vice President Cheney the worst ever. 41% said poor, 34% said good, 1% said best ever. Ed?
Let me just correct that. Cheney and Rumsfeld were President Ford's chiefs of staff, not following President Nixon. No one has been quite as visible or quite as aggressive as Cheney has. He's been a point of great opposition, much of it because he had the power, and obviously he was someone that sort of relished the role. So I'm not surprised by that. Most vice presidents are kind of behind the scenes and are more glad-handers or players that don't overshadow a president. They stand behind him. This one overshadowed a president.
Okay, we're looking to the past. Let's move on to the future here. Carolyn Kennedy, do you think she's going to get the nod from the Governor Patterson?
It would not be smart to try to predict what the governor will do, but it does not look likely. Her first steps out have not been particularly spectacular. And who cares what her last name is? She's got to be the senator for the state of New York.
Well, you know, the Politico is reporting that Caroline Kennedy has finally, you know, she's going on record as far as what some of her policies are, but she is still considered a lightweight by many. Errol, what do you think? What do you think of this?
Well, I disagree with those people. Most of the people who are calling her a lightweight are people who want the job themselves. So they have nothing else to criticize her around. So they're just saying, well, she hasn't run in a lot of elections. She hasn't put in the political dues, you know, paid her dues. I don't know that that's going to be particularly effective with voters. It might mean a little bit with the governor, but he's got a lot of other considerations. He's got to pick a running mate. He doesn't have a lieutenant governor for complicated reasons here in New York right now. He's got to run with this person as a running mate. It's a great big state. The person has to have proven fundraising ability, proven name recognition. She's got that over all of her rivals right now, and so that's her main card, I think, and she's going to play that as hard as she can.
Ed, we're running out of time, but I want to turn really quickly to the Governor Blagojevich, and we've got this new internal report that Obama will be releasing, his camp will be releasing. What do you think of it? Do you think that essentially are we making too much of a big deal of who had contact, who spoke to whom?
If this was an accurate report, and I assume it is, then I think Rahm Emanuel is owed an apology by Fitzgerald. He made nothing that was improper. He made one call to the governor saying, here's who our choice was, and he talked to the staff about a couple times, but he did nothing that was improper, and they should have let him step out 2 weeks ago and got this thing behind him.
Hank?
Rahm Emanuel deserves an apology immediately.
It seems like everybody in Illinois politics, Jesse Jackson Jr., Rahm Emanuel, everybody who knew anything about Blagojevich knew, number one, that he was probably under investigation and therefore wired, and number two, that he was prone to cut sleazy deals that you didn't want anything, any part of.
Yeah, you know, this is going to be, it's giving us a really upfront look at exactly how Illinois politics works. But I think you're right. I think that a lot of people are being looped into all of this. Well, thank you very much to our panel again. We appreciate it. And once again, a happy birthday to you, Hank Sheinkopf. Well, tonight's poll results, 99% of you think the bank should be required to tell you where they're spending your taxpayer-funded bailout money. Thanks for being with us tonight. Please join us tomorrow. For all of us here, thanks for watching. Good night from New York. No Bias, No Bull starts right now.